host for the Intervene Show. I have a very special guest here with me, Miss Ashley. I will let her introduce herself in further detail and all the wonderful things that she does for our city and our community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am Ashley Carter Youngblood, a clinical social worker and marriage and family therapist in the Kalamazoo area.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me. Can you just start telling me a little bit about what brought you to this point?
Sure. So I have always known that I wanted to help people. And when I was young, I always would gravitate towards things that were related to community service or spiritual community. I ended up going to college, and I knew that I wanted to help people, but I knew that I wanted to help people and thought I wanted to go into ministry. Okay. So my first day of college, I declared my major as a religion major, and that ended up turning into a double major in religion and philosophy, and later a minor in Asian studies. So I thought I wanted to get my Master of Divinity and help people through the ministry, but as my journey took me a little different direction, it took me into the area of social work. So I went from the philosophical and theological to really the practical way to help people. So I always had known that's something that I wanted to do, but it was a little different than what I thought it would be.
What made you kind of come to that conclusion?
So I think my spiritual journey is pretty interesting because I really was born spiritual. I was born religious in a sense of that was something that was always very passionate for me.
Okay.
I was someone who from a very young age, even elementary school, I would take my parents from church to church and say, this isn't enough for me. I'm not getting spiritually fed.
Okay.
And who says that in elementary school? So I was always kind of a weird kid in that sense because I was so passionate about the spiritual part of me that I felt never really got fed in the way that I wanted it to. So I had explored a little bit more of my religious beliefs, and the religion major at Hope College really broadened my horizons to the variety of different spiritual beliefs and paths, and so I just took a different tour than what I thought I would originally.
But you're also a counselor, so can you kind of tell me the balance of how that works?
Yeah, so the way that I do it is I am a holistic counselor, so I look at every aspect of someone. So this could be the physical, the emotional, the financial, the social, the sexual, the spiritual. And I look at that holistically and look at what different parts can we make fully well. And so the body, spirit, and mind connection, I don't think we can really pull apart. Those are all the things that make us who we are. So I tend to let someone initiate conversation about the spiritual, because not for everyone spiritual part isn't necessarily important. Mm-hmm. So when I first meet with someone, I ask if there are any specific spiritual or cultural beliefs that are important to them, because that's often a really big part of people's story. Mm-hmm. And so based on what they say, I incorporate that and explore how maybe their spiritual journey or religious beliefs impacts where they are today and also their future goals as well.
And so who kind of are the people that come and see you? Who do you target? Who are your clientele?
So typically the people that come to see me are anywhere between like 23 years old and 60-ish. My true passion is counseling women to find their voice, empowering them to find their voice and heal their relationships. I specialize in counseling worrying women and struggling couples. Okay. So a lot of the people that I see are women, not all of them. Okay. But typically there is a holistic focus to that as well. Most of the people who come see me have heard about me as a holistic therapist, and they come to see me for that purpose.
So when you want a woman to find her voice, what is it? Tell me more about that, because I have not heard that before.
Yeah? Oh, great. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So part of, I think, what's the difficulty with, if we think in gender binaries, just male and just female. Okay. As a female in our society, we're taught that we're made of sugar and spice and everything nice.
We are, aren't we?
Of course,
that's
right?
Okay, just making sure that we are. That is still a fact. Okay.
That's what I hear. I don't know. I can't attest to that personally. But so that tells us that we're supposed to be compassionate. We're supposed to be giving. We're supposed to be the person who helps everyone else. But I find time and time again, the women that I see, they forget to care for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so part of that is allowing women to say, you know what, my needs matter. It's not always about serving other people. Sure, that can be a really important part of who I am, but that's not all of it. So I give the example of, have you ever flown on a plane? When the oxygen comes down, what do they tell you to do?
I don't remember.
Put your oxygen mask on
First,
before you
yeah.
help someone else.
Okay, yes.
And so I find that a lot of women have difficulty remembering that they need to care for themselves so that they can be fully well and be able to care for other people too. Very rarely do I have that conversation with males, but that's about that empowerment piece, is finding your voice and figuring out what your needs are and being able to communicate that to your partner, to coworkers, to, you name it, so that you can really be your true self.
I agree with what you say with that, because I talk to people and I'm in the financial industry. And so what I end up talking to people about is, what is your biggest asset? And what most people's biggest asset is my car, my house, the money in my account, my career. And I'm like, no. You are your biggest financial asset.
Right.
Without
Right.
you, without you living, without your life, none of what you have matters, or it's just become a bill or a burden to your family, or it can be a situation for them to have to try to maintain. So that is very true. You have to take care of yourself first.
Yeah, and I think the other part about the asset is that what I do in therapy, and every therapist does things differently, because we're human. But what I do is I try to create a focus on strengths.
Okay.
So a lot of times I ask people, what are the best things about you? What are the things that can really carry you through and make change? And often people tend to forget about their strengths. And so part of, in my mind, the process of therapy is allowing people to rediscover and embrace their strengths. And a lot of the times I see for women that it's harder to be able to embrace their strengths because it's hard to give ourselves permission to say, we're really awesome in this way. We think like, well, what are people going to think of me? They'll think of the B word, or they're going to think I have a huge ego, which, there's nothing wrong with it being empowered and embracing, I'm awesome in this way. And, I'm going to live my life like that.
That's interesting that you said that, because I can see that being a part of what society has become.
Absolutely.
What would your goals be? What are some of your goals with that? I know that for empowering women, but in your perfect world, what would be the change? What would you see?
Well, yeah, let me answer that in two ways.
Go
So
right ahead.
one, the way that I do therapy is I partner with people on their journey. So I am never going to say, hey, here's the goal, let's accomplish it.
Okay.
So I always make sure that I work with someone to figure out what are the goals that you want to accomplish. Frankly, they may not be the goals that I think are best for them. If I'm concerned about it, I'm going to have a conversation, but a lot of that is really driven by the client. This is their time to figure out what they want to accomplish. So that's a question that I would probably directly ask someone individually. But in my perfect world, personally, I think for women, we tend to look for permission outside of ourselves. But I think it's really about giving ourselves permission, one, to have a voice, to two, have our own needs and make that okay, to validate them, to not necessarily apologize for them. So I think partially it's giving ourselves permission. If women could walk around empowered and give themselves permission for who they are, as opposed to feeling like they have to judge themselves, or they have to fit a specific body type, or they can't make this person upset with what they said, I think that would allow us really to interact in a much more healthy and empowered way than what happens now.
That's interesting. I know you talked about having a therapy dog and you training your therapy dog.
Yeah.
When you used him, was that a good way for women to kind of start opening up to you when you had those sessions?
Yeah, the therapy dog training and experience with clients was really interesting because I did a lot of research on that.
Okay.
And there is a ton of research out on what we would call animal-assisted therapy. And that can be dogs, it can be horses, it can be cats, hamsters, birds, llamas, you name it. There's a really wide range of that. With a therapy dog, though, the interesting experience is they're going to greet the dog before they greet me.
Oh.
They're immediately going to get on the ground and say, oh, hi, so good to see you. They want to come back because of the dog. And the whole energy in the room really softens. It's about meeting an animal on a level that often we don't want to feel quite as vulnerable with another human being.
Okay.
But when we're with an animal, especially a fluffy, cute dog, it's hard to not have your heart melt a little bit. So with him, I noticed that we could go a lot deeper a lot of the times, and people felt more safe. They would have the dog on their lap and be able to pet them when they felt really uncomfortable. The dog would approach them if they were crying to kind of heal and repair that. The animal can facilitate the physical comforting touch that I just ethically typically don't as a therapist. So it's kind of a gap to be able to bridge the emotional connection between therapist and client.
When you had the males, when you had family therapy, were the men pretty much with the same emotions? Or did you think that helped break down some of the barriers when the gentlemen were in the room with the therapy dog as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my experience, the softening with a therapy dog was universal to ages, to genders, to, you name it. Again, who doesn't like a fluffy white dog?
Yeah.
That wants to sit on your lap.
Yeah.
So, I think everyone opens up to that. And research also shows that too, that there's a lot of things, even physiologically, that change, like heartbeat and breathing and stress levels and, just like the vets, they'll take the therapy dogs to veterans, or they'll give veterans a therapy dog because it will help soothe them. Same for people who are in nursing homes or children's hospitals. That's why the animals go and visit them, because there's something soothing about an animal. And we know literally petting an animal can help reduce stress as well.
So would that be a recommendation for therapy for counselors, that maybe that's something that they can do, or that's something you just kind of specialize in yourself?
Yeah, I went through the training and I did that. You have to have a specific kind of training and pass a kind of rigorous certification test to be able to have a therapy animal.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a liability issue, and that's where all of my research came in.
Okay.
So to bring your dog to therapy isn't a therapy dog. I went through the process. I wanted to make sure that I was official and compliant with all of the regulations in the field. So that's something that's really important to me, and that's what I did. So people can do it, but just like any other certification in the field, it takes process, it takes commitment, it takes work to be able to do that.
And he was special because he's hypoallergenic.
He is, yep. So he doesn't shed.
Okay.
He was actually found on the street.
Really?
So we don't know much about him. He's about 30 pounds. He's a little awkward looking, but pretty adorable and fluffy.
Okay.
So we don't know exactly what he is, but we suspect poodle because he has kind of curly hair the longer it gets, and he doesn't shed.
Okay.
So
that kind of work, did you look for a therapy dog when you were going into your line of work with them?
I did. My dogs are my children. So we have 2 rescues, and the therapy dog was the other rescue. The one that we've had for longer, he just loves everyone. He's just a wonderful little dog, but he's afraid of people. He's very tender.
Okay.
So I love dogs, and I love to be able to interact with dogs. I love dog training. I'm a real nerd. I like to learn about things, and especially when a dog is involved, it's so much more fun. So I knew I wanted to connect with dogs in that way, and there aren't a lot of people in the Kalamazoo area that have a therapy dog.
Okay.
So I wanted to capitalize on that too, and offer that as a service to people. So that's something that I gravitated towards, just because it was fun. I love being around dogs. Who doesn't? Unless you have a fear of dogs, then that's something else, of course. But
And for a person who's coming to seek you, is there anything that they should think about when they're looking to consider counseling?
sure. People go to counseling for a variety of reasons. I think a lot of times there's unfortunately a stigma about therapy that you're crazy or there's something wrong with you. But sometimes people just come in because they want to be a better person. I'm also a life coach, so I can really coach people on things that aren't specific symptoms or areas of concern. But it's really about finding the best fit for someone. So every time I see someone on the first visit, I always tell them, hey, you know what? This may be a great fit from the beginning, and that's awesome, and it may not be, and that's okay. The therapist is there for you. So it's about looking at what experiences they have, what training they have, what they specialize in, making sure that you find someone who fits the specific needs that you have, and making sure that you're comfortable with them, because it's just like us. I mean, it's just like 2 humans talking. And if you don't feel comfortable with the person for any reason, we're trained not to be offended at that. That's our job, to be able to serve other people. So we always want to make sure that that's the right fit for someone as well.
And I think with you having a spiritual background, for someone who is looking for a therapist who's not just textbook, but also have a spiritual, can you talk about that, please?
Sure. Yeah. the biggest thing that I really do is holistic counseling, like I said, mind, body, spirit, but also the other aspects. So for me, therapy is not just the typical thing that happens. Therapy is really a process of growth. So I'm looking at every aspect of someone, including the spiritual, if they want to incorporate that.
Okay.
And I make sure to address all of the areas that they want to be able to address. A lot of people think that therapists are all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that's important for people to know that we are all different and we all do therapy a different way. And because someone is going to therapy, I would argue makes them very brave.
Okay.
So again, it's about, for me personally, it's about being strength-based. It's about looking at all of the aspects of their life that are important to them and that they want to change. Any other questions about that? I mean, I feel
like how many weeks of sessions would be a good time frame? Is it lifetime counseling, or you're like, for 6 months, 3 months? What would you say?
Mm-hmm. It's really hard to answer that, especially clinically, because everyone is so different.
Okay.
For someone, it may be, I just lost my father and I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything. And it may be more short-term therapy just to help process through the grief.
Okay.
I have some people come in who are at a professional crossroads in their life, and they say, I want to be a better version of myself, but I'm not exactly sure what direction to go. And so it can be kind of the gentle life coaching that I described. But for other people, they may be dealing with more severe symptoms that are lifelong. Mm-hmm. So there could be mood disorders or severe depression, there could be addiction, there could be family history or trauma, and those are all things that, depending on the person, can sometimes take a lifetime to be able to address. What I tell people, though, is that I feel like my job is working myself out of a job.
Okay.
I want to make sure that people leave my office and have the skills that they need to be able to address things at home, whether that's couples counseling and improving actual communication techniques based on evidence and what we know works, or it also could be managing stress and general things like that. So it really varies, and it depends again on what the goals are for people. Sometimes we think it's not going to take very long, and sometimes it takes a little longer. And sometimes we think it's going to be long-term and people get better really quickly, which is always really fun. But I describe to people, think of yourself as an onion. We begin to peel each layer at a time. And often if people are coming in, like let's say there's an addiction issue, if people are coming in and there's an addiction, people aren't going to be using just because. There's often some sort of underlying issue, whether it's trauma or anxiety or depression. And so as we, let's stop the use, let's figure out how to do that. And it's one layer at a time. And that's really the process of self-discovery that, I love what I do, and it's so fun to be involved in the process of people growing. And so it's so different for everyone because I don't know how people are going to grow.
Thank you for talking about the addiction piece, because that was going to be my next question to you is, and say a person, would a family member recommend, how could a family member who may love someone who's dealing with addiction, how can they, what would be the first steps or a couple starters that you would suggest?
Yeah. I just recently wrote a blog on this.
Okay.
So addiction is one of my specialties because I'm also a certified alcohol and drug counselor, among some other certifications, which I can go over as well.
Please, you can name them all.
Now would be the time. Oh, okay, I'll go for it. So I'm a certified acupuncture detoxification specialist, which is an evidence-based technique for acupuncture in the ears to manage behavioral health symptoms. So not a lot of people do that. I'm level 2 trained in Gottman couples therapy, which is really kind of the go-to evidence-based couples therapy technique since like the 1970s. So there are some really specific techniques that we can incorporate with that. I'm, like I said, a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I'm also a journey practitioner, which is a guided meditation that's holistic for healing as well. So among that, one of my specialties is addiction. And that really is the million-dollar question of how does a loved one support and watch sort of the self-destructive tendencies that people experience. And if people want to, they can always visit my website, because I write blogs, and I write both for the Women's Lifestyle magazine and for National Awakenings magazine too. So I'm always putting something out at least monthly. I just wrote a blog on how to help a loved one who just won't stop using. So part of the balance, I think, with loved ones is finding, how can you love them unconditionally, but how can you not enable them?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really fine line that's different for everyone. But it's about communicating your concern for that loved one in a way that focuses on your own emotions. So if you say, I don't know what's wrong with you, why won't you just stop drinking? You're ruining the family. That's going to feel really blaming for you. And addiction is never something that people are proud of. So there's always this tenderness about addiction too, that we want to be real about it and honest about it, but we don't want to trigger someone's guilt. Going through addiction for someone who's using it is hard enough anyway. But it's about maybe sharing your own experience as a partner or as a loved one, and sharing your concern about that. The difficult thing for people to recognize is that we can never force someone to get help as much as we want to. And the confusing thing about addiction is that there can be negative consequence after negative consequence. Let's go really stereotypical and say they lose their job, their wife kicks them out, they're homeless, even with that, some people still use, because again, layers of the onion, right? We have trauma that's unhealed, we have anxiety or depression or all of those things. So we have to be able to address that, and until someone is ready to acknowledge that there is a problem, we can't force them to get sober or to stop using or to stop the addictive behavior. But the other part of that too, going back to what we talked about way in the beginning about self-care, is that it is really exhausting to watch a loved one self-destruct. And so part of that is knowing where the line is, and knowing, I'm going to support you, I love you, I'm here for you, but I can't watch you do blank, whatever the unhealthy behavior is. When you're ready to get help, I want to be involved in any way that you want me to be involved, and I'm here for you. But that may also be going to meetings for family members of people who are dealing with addiction, like Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. There are a lot of meetings locally where people can do that. And focusing on yourself, so that watching that self-destructive nature of addiction doesn't become so overwhelming that we can't function ourselves.
That's a good point. I'm just wondering, is there something that a person can do for themselves as they are, dealing with a family member with addiction?
That's going to be so different for everyone, that it's hard to generally say. Did you have anything in mind, like a specific example, or?
Maybe there could be some reading materials, or
Okay.
Or contacting your website, or
Absolutely.
Are there certain prayers that you will go to in the Bible, some things to kind of help the person who is going through this, maybe so they can have the strength, so that they can keep going. Because if they are in love with someone who is struggling with addiction, they may still have a family. There are some things that they still may have to do. They may still have to go to work every day. How can they, even though they may love their person who is struggling, what they may have to do for themselves
Absolutely.
in the process?
There are a lot of resources for addiction. You're right. Some of them include my website, which is www.kalamazoo-counseling.com. So that's where you can also find blogs. That's where you can find information on all of my specialties, contact information. But I also dedicated a specific portion of my website to resources.
Okay.
And so in that page, I link to specific resources about addiction, about trauma, about holistic health, about chronic pain, about anxiety. And there are some documentaries, there's some information about addiction that for loved ones, I think it's really important for people to know that addiction is a disease. It's not just a matter of willpower. And those resources will help you understand how exactly it's a disease, because a lot of people just think, well, stop drinking or stop using. It's not that difficult. But it's definitely more than that. So absolutely, I think education is a really foundational piece of that. So especially when we think about self-care, if people don't understand addiction, or if it's hard for them to watch a loved one go into self-sabotage mode, sometimes that may be counseling for them.
Thank you.
If the loved one who's dealing with addiction isn't ready for that, that may be time for you to seek some support. And that may be from a spiritual community, it may be from a friend, but that may not be enough. It may really need to be from a professional who specializes in addiction and can really help you understand and cope and watch the play-by-play. I mean, because the way that people's addiction manifests is so different. They may be doing well, but then they may relapse. And how do you deal with a relapse? And what changes about the boundaries that you set with the person who's addicted? So it depends on the person, but absolutely, I always tell people whatever works for you. There is no specific prescription for what's best for you. So sometimes that's just an exploration. If talking to a friend isn't enough, then it may be time to seek professional help and support for that.
You have other things that you spoke about as far as the acupuncture. Can we talk about some of those other methods that you are using and what they are used for? Sure.
Yeah, acupuncture was a really important part of my life and my own healing. And that's also one of the reasons why I also specialize in chronic pain and illness. Because that's something that I have experienced on my journey, and acupuncture was a huge part of my healing. So what I do is a protocol developed by the National Acupuncture Detoxification Association. You can also find that information on my website too, because I link to their information and their research. So we do 5 points in the ear on each ear, and specifically targeted points that help to manage behavioral health symptoms. Originally, it was developed for addiction treatment, actually. For cravings, for withdrawal. But I've also had people who have successfully used it with me for weight loss, for chronic pain, for anxiety, for sleep, for depression, for you name it. So I put the needles in when I am talking with someone, and even if someone has a fear of needles, I can handle that. The needles are actually only about the width of a hair, so you can barely even see them, and they don't go in very far. So it's not like really big needles that people are afraid of. But I use that, and I have some people who specifically also come to me for that as one of the holistic things that I offer. So 5 points in the ear, you keep them in for anywhere between 25 and 45 minutes, and just let them do their thing. The idea is that it internally creates balance in a way that if those parts of our body are what the Chinese would call meridians. So acupuncture has been around for over 3,000 years, and the idea is that we have meridians or energy pathways. We would in Western medicine probably call it like nerves or blood circulation or things like that. So the thought is if there are blockages, we can't be fully well. So what acupuncture does is it targets some of those areas and removes the blockages. The interesting part about auricular acupuncture, which just means in the ear, is that the entire human body can be mapped in the ear. Similar to like reflexology, if you've ever seen those like liver, kidney, left knee, in the same way, the ear. And so what we can do is we can target all of those different spots, and it's actually just as effective as full body acupuncture.
Thank you.
So it's pretty awesome to be able to use that tool for people.
So tell me more about the holistic. So you have the acupuncture. What are some of your other specialty tools that you have?
Yeah, the holistic piece more for me is a general worldview that I approach. So I definitely have the acupuncture that I use for people. I also, like I said, am a journey practitioner, so that's a guided meditation for healing. And so another part of the holistic piece, though, is I use a lot of mindfulness. So for example, I lead a free meditation group the first Saturday of every month at my office. You can also find details at my website as well. But it's incorporating that too, because I find if we're going to heal, if we're going to do therapy successfully and have successful outcomes, we have to learn not only what's going on, but we have to learn how to sit with uncomfortable emotions. So part of the holistic part is, the empowerment that I talked about, but it's also embracing our own experiences and learning how to be well in all aspects, which often includes things like being able to observe and not attach to that, and incorporating this spiritual part of that, and just using that as a general overview of how to view healing.
And when is that again?
The first Saturday of every month. So that will be this coming June. I think it's the 3rd or something like that. That sounds familiar. So that's from 10 to 11 a.m. first Saturday, and that's at my office. You can find details on my website.
Can you give the community your website information?
Absolutely. So you can go to www.kalamazoo-counseling.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. Is there anything that you would like to say before we head out? Because I greatly appreciate all the knowledge that you have given us today.
Absolutely. No, I just want to thank you for being able to have me, and it was wonderful to talk with you and tell you a little bit about what I do.
Well, thank you, because your information has been a blessing. It's been a wealth of knowledge, and I've learned so many new